Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of the Contrarian. We are thrilled to have back with us Pasha Dashtgard, who is one of our friends from PERIL, who works on radicalization and social media, and in particular, what it's doing to young men and boys. Welcome back, Pasha. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Jen, for having me back. Good to be at the Contrarian. Always happy to chat about men and masculinities.
Absolutely. Now, there was recently a report that came out on the state of men. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Equimundo, organization that I really love and respect, came out with the State of American Men in 2025. And it had some really interesting findings and some stuff that I wanted to pull together, bring in my social psychology background, some research on men and masculinities, but then also pull it into this kind of broader conversation about what are men and boys in America dealing with today.
Right.
One of the things that I was really struck by, and I've heard this in a couple of different contexts, is this real tension between men as the expectation of men as primary providers and breadwinners in conflict with this sort of new economic reality where it is harder than ever for young men and young women, but it's harder for young people to sort of be that single income head of the household, leave it to beaver kind of husband, father, white picket fence. That opportunity is really diminishing. And yet the expectations that men hold for themselves and that women hold for men is still here. And so we're in this very tricky place where our cultural understandings about gender and gender roles are shifting, but in that gray area from black to white, it's there's a lot of people who are feeling the pressure and the sort of shame of not being able to be the primary provider, but butting up against the reality that that's actually a product of economic and social circumstances that have nothing to do with how masculine you are or how tough you are.
Right. And this has to do, of course, with both the general factor of the economy and also some statistics we have about men's declining participation in college, which is a traditional road to the kind of financial success, lower marriage rates, and the rest. So, how do men react to this conflict, as you put it, between the reality and the expectation?
Yeah, not great. So, 86% of men and 77% of women will list provider as the most important trait to define masculinity. And yet, what we see is that for men who are failing to do that, you have higher rates of suicidal ideation. You have higher rates of feeling inadequate as a caregiver. And then you have this sense of a lack of purpose. And so, this is especially true in our society where so much of your identity is tied to your career and this sense of this is who I am. And so if you're not able to be a provider, what can you be? And so what we've seen in some of this research, this is an interesting intersection where there's a thing in psychology called compensatory control, which is if you can't control this part of your life, you're going to control this part of your life. If you're, a retail worker and your schedule is changing constantly by your boss, you might come home and be real rigid with your kids or real rigid with your partner. So what we're seeing is pro-gun rhetoric in these group of men who are feeling like they're failing to be providers. They shift to this protector role. And so this is this kind of interesting intersection of pro-gun attitudes and sort of this version of masculinity that is trying to compensate for an inability to sort of embody a traditional masculine role. And so this is not good. This is,
Yeah.
this is how you get violent extremism. This is how you get, people joining militias. This is part of this idea that if I can't be this, then I'll be that. And if I can't prove myself in this arena, then I have to prove myself in that.
And do they wind up identifying a particular villain, a cause of their woes? Is it women? Is it Jews? Is it blacks? Is it all of the above?
This is a great question, Jen. So this is the way in which radicalization works and operates, is that so you have this person who is vulnerable to radicalization because they're feeling like a lack of purpose, they're feeling ashamed, they're feeling like failures. And then you give them some narrative, some grievance-based narrative, and they pick up on that and they use that as their way to sort of get pulled into an ideology that tells them that it's not your fault, that it's okay, that it's actually these people's fault. And so it's all of the above, right? It depends on what part of the digital ecosystem you venture into, but it could be the Jews are to blame. It could be feminists are to blame. It could be wokeism, DEI, all of that is to blame. It could be immigrants to blame, right? So it depends. And then sometimes it starts as immigrants and it moves to Jews. It starts as feminists and it moves to the LGBTQ community. So it's like it's many ways down the pit, right? It's like, and it depends what they come across. But frankly, depending on whatever digital ecosystem you're in or what kind of social media content you're consuming, you might be exposed to all of it, and you'll be exposed to all of it eventually. You
Right.
know, yeah.
Now we've had other times where economic misfortune has created mass unemployment or a diminution of men's role in society, the Great Depression, I think of. But the atmosphere today is kind of supercharged by other factors, including social media. Talk about how today's economic dilemma gets transferred into these very dangerous traits and trends, which in the past might have been directed in other ways, or quite frankly, might have just had tragic endings of suicide, of, abandoning families and the rest. Why is this kind of radical, angry, aggressive reaction the kind of default now in this economic ennui, if you will?
Yeah, so I think that what's happening, there's a couple of things happening here. I think that first, there's this notion in sort of psychology called precarious manhood. And it's this idea that masculinity is one of these identities that can be taken away from you. It's not something that is like a permanent stamp. It's something that you constantly have to re-up in every social situation, in every room you enter. If you talk to these like Andrew Tate style male supremacist influencers, part of what they're selling is this kind of like totality of life that you have to devote to being an alpha male, where it's like you got to wake up in the morning and you got to shower. You can't, bend over to pick up your towel. You have to squat to pick up your towel because that's not like literally, Jen. I'm not even joking.
Right. No, it's funny, but on one hand, it's not because it's this constant pressure. Everything you do matters. You could lose it by the way you pick up your towel.
Exactly. And so when you think about like, so there's a couple of ways in which our technology and our society is like really making this much worse, this precarity, where, so for one example, I think that men who are being called out or like a fear of being called out is really creating a lot of anxiety in boys and men. So young boys who are growing up and learning about new sort of more feminist informed gender roles, excuse me, they're really concerned about, I don't want to be a creepy, I don't want to be a creep, I don't want to be labeled as one of those kinds of guys. And so this sort of anxiety, when you couple that with the precarious manhood, it's like you're living on this sort of razor's edge in the mind of these boys. In reality, like this is not really a thing. People are not nearly as judgmental as you might think. But in psychology, it's called the spotlight effect. Don't worry about it.
Right.
But
Right. Everyone is watching me. Everyone is judging me. Yeah.
exactly. Turns out that's really not true. Everyone is actually worried about what everyone else is
Themselves.
thinking.
Yes.
But for these young boys, especially like teens who are still like sort of finding their identity, they feel like everyone is looking, everyone is scrutinizing me. I don't want to be called a creep. I don't want to be called predator or whatever. And then on the flip side, they're like having to balance that with, well, but I still need to prove myself as a man. I still need to like demonstrate that I'm masculine, that I'm can have sex with like casually with women, that I'm still tough and strong and competitive. And so you have this really like bad intersection of, again, expectations on the one hand, and then this sort of precarity of having to constantly prove yourself. I also think this plays out in dating apps and like the technology, the way that dating apps and dating has like sort of manifested with these young men, where they're like, we have a loneliness epidemic in life amongst men and women because of urban sprawl and changing economics. Then we have sort of technology mediated dating and relationships. And so what's happening is that dating apps are terrible for people. They're not good. They actually incentivize all of the wrong kinds of characteristics, where it's like you think that it's, meeting somebody, it's like, oh, well, they like Star Wars and I like Star Wars. And in reality, it's like, are you a decent, nice human who's like sweet and kind and thoughtful? But like, that's not what dating apps sort of measure for, right? And so you're creating the circumstance where men are having a hard time dating, women are having a hard time dating, and dating is seen as the like entry point, the validator of your masculinity. So it's like, again, just like the provider role is like structurally becoming harder to attain, dating successfully is becoming harder to attain. And these are two critical components of your masculinity. And so if we're defining our masculinity so rigidly, then being a man becomes a lot harder and a lot more precarious and a lot more high stakes. And, it strikes me that when I was growing up, I'm an elder millennial. There was a like I saw the germination of this narrative around the media is really bad for young girls and women. That
Yes.
expectations, like Courtney Cox and all these like super skinny celebrities and models and whatever, they're creating all these negative body images for women. That
Yes.
there's all these unfair models of femininity. And now I think that we need to turn that same lens and that same attention to boys and men. Boys and
Yes.
men also struggle with unrealistic body image issues. Every like I don't know one dude who doesn't want a six pack, who didn't want to look like Brad Pitt from
Right.
Fight Club, right? But then also you layer on top of that not only do you have to look like Brad Pitt from Fight Club, but you also have to have a fancy luxury car. You have to be rich. You have to be powerful. And so it's like this same sort of unrealistic expectations, unrealistic body image issues. These are all being exploited on the internet. Looksmax forums, dating and relationship forums, all of that stuff is sending the same toxic messages to boys and men as it still is to girls and women.
So, how do you, in a positive way, intervene so that not that you are patronizing or condescending, but that you give men either the internal emotional resources to deal with expectations, or frankly, you help redefine what it is to be masculine?
Ooh, that is the $1 million question, Jen.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of ideas. My big thought is I would love to create, and PERIL, my research lab, is actively trying to cultivate this. We're trying to create spaces for young men to get together and talk, where it's centered around masculinity and online harm. That is to me like I want to have that conversation. I want as many young men to get in a room together and have that conversation as possible. And I think that if you have that conversation with the guardrails of we're not going to blame women, we're not going to blame Jews, we're not going to blame Muslims, we're not going to blame queer people. Like, if you can have a conversation about what is really going on in society, what's really going on between men and women and technology, then we can have a space where young men can really talk about their own feelings and their own sense of self, and what do they think about being a man? What do they think about masculinity? What are the things that we want to keep with us? And what are the things that we want to leave behind? But right now, there's just not spaces for young men to have those conversations.
Right. What this reminds me a little bit is the bowling alone problem, that we don't have these civic institutions, clubs, groups, maybe outside of sports, and we can talk about how sports might help or frankly hurt this situation, where you can have this interpersonal contact. We've substituted doom scrolling and computer games for an environment where people can get a sense of identity, a sense of accomplishment by being part of a group, by doing something in their community or being part of a religious organization. Is that part of the solution to kind of restructure and rebuild civil society to create these opportunities?
I could not agree more. Yes, yes. Putnam was right. He called it all those years ago. It's like I think about what we have now is like fast food relative to like good, nutritious, healthy meals. It's like you having a parasocial relationship with your favorite YouTuber. It's like empty calories. It
Yeah.
feels like you're eating, it feels like you're getting nutrition because your stomach is full for that moment, but it's a one-way relationship. It's me consuming your content. I don't
Yeah.
actually have a friend there. It's just a guy who's making money by being famous and telling me the kinds of things I want to hear. And so when you can get out into real life with real people, you build real relationships. This is something I talk about a lot as a former therapist. It's sort of understood in therapy that your the success of a therapeutic relationship is defined by the strength of rapport between the client and the counselor. You can in fact measure this. Like in the first 2, 3 meetings of a therapist and a client, if there is warmth between those two people, that correlates to positive outcomes in therapy 9 months later.
Right.
This is true for all of our relationships. And it's like, I need to build a sense of like good faith interpretations and a sense of rapport with somebody before I can have real, deep, meaningful conversations. And
Yeah.
all of our socializing is mediated through social media, where like, I don't know if you're a real person. You might be a bot. You might be a troll. You might be just like you're catfishing me because you're bored today. That doesn't allow for the kind of strength of bond that a real meaningful relationship needs. And I'm going to just say right now, this is all coming down. Like, I'm going to give you a preview of what's going to happen 10 years from now. AI chat is going to disrupt this even more. We're already seeing it. We're already seeing the way that young people are relying on AI chatbots as like a sort of surrogate friend. And it's like, it's terrifying to me. And
Yeah.
it's like we've created Putnam is perfect in that he's like, we've created this loneliness problem through urban sprawl, through a lack of social institutions and investment in hobbies and like in-person activities. And then we're like feeding like a supplement of AI chat to sort of like fill that void. And it's not nutritious enough. It's not filling enough. It's not like there's nothing real to it. It's like a looking glass where you're just like,
Right.
you're talking to yourself and you're just hearing what you want to hear. And it's like it's very like Black Mirror. It's very like
Yes.
dark, frankly.
It is. Now, one of the things I love about PERIL is that it's all about solutions and interventions. So talk to us a little bit about what is some of the programs and ideas you're trying and what you're finding as you try to implement this in communities, schools, around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we are doing, the interventions that we're developing are basically looking at any trusted adult in the life of a child. Plausibly, this could be parents and caregivers, but it could be your grandparents, your cousins, a teacher, a after school tutor, a like, any faith leaders, any kind of trusted adult in the life of a child. We want to give them two things. We want to give them knowledge, we want to give them skills. Knowledge of what the problems are and skills to effectively intervene when they see a young person who is at risk and who is heading down that sort of pathway. And so what PERIL is doing is we've created these resources. We have the parent and caregiver guide. We have the building networks guide. We have like we have the not just a joke guide. We have a bunch of these different resources. And then we're turning them into workshops and trainings that we push out into the community. So it's like we have a parent and caregiver guide. Now we're going to go to PTAs. Now we're going to go to parent groups and we're going to try and teach our parents. These are the kinds of things that you should watch out for. These are the kinds of ways, if your kid is starting to parrot Andrew Tate or, some, Fresh and Fit podcast, here are the questions that you can ask. Here's the things not to do, right? And so in this way, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get everyone in society, from a tutor and a basketball coach all the way to your parent. We're trying to get them all to be on the same page so that anyone plausibly can say, hey, I think that there's a problem with Timmy. I think there's a problem with Jill, and that we can get them the help that we need.
Wow. Now, have you been able to follow through on the results, to follow up on some of the programs to see what the impacts are, what the results are?
So we've done a bunch of studies looking at the impact of the resource for a full year. So we've done these like really cool, this is very nerdy, but like longitudinal studies are very best practices. And so we've been able to track the parent and caregiver guide for a full year to see how long does the information stick. And interestingly, it seems like 3 months after reading it, it peaks and then it dips. And then from 3 months to 9 months later, like for the rest of the year, it sort of gradually comes back up. We're now testing the same thing with the building networks guide. And soon, next year, we'll be able to test it with the not just a joke guide. So we're able to test how does the reading of these guides impact your behavior. And what we found, for example, was with the parent and caregiver guide, 12% of our sample joined or created a group on youth radicalization. Yeah, as a result of reading our guide. And that, like, it's tremendous. Like reading those results, it was like, some of it is very casual. It's like wine, like what was it, like wine and wine?
I love it.
But sometimes it was very intentional. It was like I'm worried about online bullying. I'm worried about like online harassment. And so one way or another, getting parents to think about these things, ask questions of their kids, getting more and more adults to have eyes on the young people in their life. This is the way that you build resilience in a community to radicalization.
Wow, that is extremely encouraging in this dark mirror era, as you put it. Now, if parents, caregivers, coaches, whoever want to get this information, what do they do?
Oh, easy. You go to perilresearch.com and we have a little tab where it's all of our resources. You can download them for free. They're free for anyone to use. We want you guys to use them. We want people to go on them. The whole Contrarian audience, there is a resource for you, I promise.
There you go. There you go. Well, this is incredibly encouraging. And one of the things I think about, because we're in this political moment, is the very famous testimony that Mr. Rogers gave when they were trying to defund public television way back in the 50s and 60s. And he talked about teaching children to own their emotions, to modulate their emotions, to be constructive. And it strikes me at the time that we're destroying public television, that we are doing great damage to our schools and other institutions, that we need to be clever in coming up with new resources, new programs, new networks to try to rebuild and address the very same problem Mr. Rogers was worried about decades ago. And that's the mental, emotional health of our kids. So thank you, Pasha. I always love talking to you. It's always fascinating. Spans politics to social science to psychology. And contrarians, you now know where to find the information you need. So thanks so much. We'll look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you so much, Jen. Take care.
Bye-bye.